Shalom Lukulam. Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center in Jerusalem, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to another of our Zoom conversations, live webinars with a guest. Over the last several years now, we've focused on either contemporary issues or books or historical affairs or things that are going on in the Jewish world. But obviously, of late, there's been a lot of, as they say in Hebrew, achshavi, very contemporary issues to discuss. And we've really been, I think, blessed in the last few weeks to have people like Yaakov Katz and Jonathan Reinhold the last few weeks. And we're joined today by another great guest to really continue the conversation that we've been having about the very dramatic events of the last few weeks in Iran. What we wanted to do, having discussed what was going on during the war in Iran with Yaakov Katz, and then focusing on the U.S.-Israel side of things last week with Jonathan Reinhold, I wanted to bring someone that could talk about both the operation itself from a sort of military security angle, and also a little about what led up to that, what enabled Israel to carry out such an extraordinary operation through what we've been doing in the past few years that I think many of us are aware of through the headlines, but maybe haven't got into the details of. So I'm very happy to have a speaker who literally wrote the book on the Mossad's operations in Iran, and also very recently wrote, I think, one of the most clarifying articles amidst all the noise and quite confusing mixed messages that were going on about what exactly Israel succeeded or didn't succeed to do in Iran. One of the most clarifying articles was written by our guest, so I'm happy that he's with us for that as well. So without further ado, I will introduce Yonah Jeremy Bob, the Jerusalem Post's senior military correspondent and intelligence analyst, previously the literary editor at the Post. He covers the Israeli military, the Mossad, the Shin Bet, defense technologies, Iran's weapons of mass destruction, usefully for our conversation, cyber warfare, and war crimes allegations. He's the author, as I said, of the award-winning Target Tehran, a book about the Mossad's secret war against the nuclear program, and also, which we'll also discuss, the Mossad's role in the Abraham Accords. It was listed by the Wall Street Journal as one of its top 5 books for politics in 2023, and it won the Jewish Book Council Natan Award for 2024. Also, it was spotted on the desk of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the run-up to the war with Iran. So that was something that I'm sure Yonah was very, very proud of. He's been interviewed a lot on Western media and also a lot of print and radio, Hebrew media. He lectures all over the place. I won't go through all the lengthy list that I have here, but let's introduce Yonah Jeremy Bob. Yonah, thanks so much for joining us.
Very glad to be with you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you for 30, 40 minutes and then allow questions from the audience. Those of you who've joined us, if you can write your questions in the chat, and I will come to those questions once I finish my conversation. Rob Bloom has already asked for us to put a link to the book in the chat. I will do that, Rob, momentarily. Okay, so first things first. Let's start at the beginning, so to speak, which is before we get to the events of the past few weeks. Your book covered the extensive Mossad operations in Iran, which, as I said, and you're going to expound on, effectively enabled what we've seen these last few weeks. So can you tell us a little about what the Mossad was doing in Iran, when it started in earnest, and how it led to what we've been seeing?
Absolutely. So if you break down what the Mossad did, especially on June 13th, the day that the war started, but over the entire war with Iran this past month, there are 3 main components. You have lots of agents on the ground, right? Literally hundreds of Mossad agents on the ground in Iranian territory. You have remote control vehicles like cars and trucks doing all sorts of sabotage and using weapons to hit all sorts of Iranian targets. And you have drones being launched from within Iranian territory. There was even like a drone base, a Mossad drone base in Iranian territory being launched to blow things up. And what's unbelievable is that all of these things had serious dress rehearsals, and all of that is in my book. The book starts with the 2018 Mossad seizure of the Iranian secret nuclear archives. That, by the way, the archives basically gave the IDF and the Mossad a map of all the nuclear sites that they knew to know more about them and all the nuclear sites that they didn't know. So everything that happened last month, they had basically a map from these archives. How did they get the archives? They had dozens of agents penetrated into Iran. All right, this is already in 2018. And I can spend like a whole hour talking about this operation, but basically, they had a team that was, surveilling the place where they were hiding the archives. They had a team that was taking care of the electronic surveillance. They had a team that was taking care of the physical security guards. They had a team that was ready to use, flamethrowers basically to like break through at 3,600 degrees the safes that were holding the secrets. Because this isn't Mission Impossible where they had like a little thumb drive, right? They took the physical archives, book loads, bookshelf loads of archives in trucks. That's what they took out, the originals, the original materials. So this is literally dozens of agents doing this. I'm still under the censor for how they got out, but I'm allowed to say that according to foreign sources, if you take a look at the border between Iran and Azerbaijan, it's a very porous border. There's a major drug trade there, where most of the smugglers have a simple rule of don't ask, don't tell. They don't want to know what they're smuggling. And the most amazing part of the Mossad is that the Iranians themselves probably smuggled their own nuclear secrets out of Iran, thinking that maybe they were smuggling drugs. That is the ingenuity of the Mossad, not just they can blow people up. Anyway, so that's basically a dress rehearsal. If you can get dozens of agents into the heart of Tehran, then why can't you get hundreds? And another chapter in the book is about the assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the Oppenheimer, the father of the Iranian nuclear program. I can now just straight out say it that Israel and the Mossad did it. In Target Tehran, even 2 years ago, I still had to use all sorts of, according to foreign sources and word plays in order to sort of like make the reader know that we did it without saying that we did it. But because of what happened last month, now I can say that we did it. Um, how did we do it? There was a remote gun placed on a truck, a remote control gun controlled by somebody in Tel Aviv, and they used that gun to gun down the father of the nuclear program. Iran later was like spreading some stories that there was like a whole squad, squadron or group of Mossad agents on the ground shooting him up close, because that would sort of like make more sense for them, and they were sort of freaked out by this whole remote control gun thing. But it turns out the remote control gun is true. And that was another rehearsal for putting weapons on all kinds of vehicles, which could be used to blow up nuclear scientists or chiefs of the Iranian military, or blow up a ballistic missile site, or blow up a nuclear site. And then the third one, again, if you look at the book, there was a nuclear facility called Karaj in June 2021, which was blown up using a drone. And so again, the Mossad had demonstrated all three of the elements that it used on June 13th on a much larger scale. It had done, real life dress rehearsals, so to speak, to show that it could do all of these things, and it was just multiplying them basically last month.
Wow. What about human intelligence? Were there Iranians effectively working with the Mossad?
Yes, yes. So I'm not allowed to say what the ratio is
Sure.
of, Israeli Mossad agents on the ground versus Iranian dissidents, but Iran has 90 million people,
Hmm.
and the majority of them aren't even Shiite. There's Kurds, there's Balukis, there's Azeris, there's all of these other groups. And those groups, if you think that in Israel, between, the political right and left, or in America between Republicans and Democrats, people of disagreements, these people don't even see that they're part of the same like culture of people. Like they basically think of themselves as occupied by this, Iranian Shiite religious theocracy. So for them, if they're helping the Mossad, they don't even see it as treason. They see it as it's in their interest to try to eventually get this foreign power basically from occupying them. And then the trickiest parts are sometimes they don't even know they're working for the Mossad. They might think that they're working for some other Iranian or for Jordanian intelligence or something like that. The Mossad agents are good enough in, if they're in an Arab country and they're Arabic, if they're in Iran and they're Persian, to basically, convince people that they're not even Israeli and they don't always know who they're working for. But a lot of the time, they're okay with it as long as they're against, the regime.
Hmm. Wow. Okay. And how does everything you just told us relate directly to what Israel did in the last few weeks in terms of preparing the ground for it, maybe even being some kind of dress rehearsal for what Israel did? How did it enable it? How did it allow Israel to do what it did in such a dramatically successful way?
Right. So basically, you take how do you get into the country? So they knew how to get not just one or two agents into the country, they knew how to get dozens into the country. Um, Whether you want to talk about smuggling across one border, it's not the only border. There are other borders also with Iran that Israel now has more access to than it used to even a couple of years ago. Israel has shown that it can fly all sorts of people into Iran without being detected. Nobody's talked about it, but obviously there have been operations where the Israeli Navy has been used to infiltrate countries. So there's a lot of different ways that you can infiltrate. You could have agents that were sleeper agents for years or for months, and you could have agents that came in, a couple days before. And all of this, again, as you said, it's a dress rehearsal. They knew how to get all of this done. They already have networks that they built that are reliable, that have been successful in blowing up nuclear facilities in the past and killing top Iranian officials in the past. So some of those people sometimes get caught, but a lot of them don't get caught. And anybody who doesn't get caught, they're already experienced, then they already have a network, and they already have their weapons, and they already know, where to build the warehouse, where to hide people. So all of this is already, basically built in and just waiting to sort of supercharge it.
From what I remember, I think it was the first day of the war of this, this part of the war, the Iranian part of this long war, but the Iranian war, the first day, Israel not only successfully assassinated a whole sort of top echelon of Iranian officials, but actually engineered the meeting in which they all happened to be in the same place. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, so they killed 9 out of the 13 top Iranian military and IRGC officials. There's, sort of pictures that have gone on with like a flow chart. The top military chief, the top chief of the IRGC, the top chief of intelligence. A lot of people say Khajizadeh, who is the head of the Air Force, was actually maybe the most important of all of these officials in terms of like his effectiveness and intelligence and strategic capabilities, his control of the ballistic missiles and involvement also in certain ways in the nuclear program. So yeah, all of those people. And I actually report today, Defense Minister Israel Katz has said that some of the timing of why they picked starting on Friday specifically related to getting people to be located in the right place. And then they knew what the backup plan was. If suddenly everything had a big problem, then everybody went to this secret additional facility to hide, and they knew where that facility was, so that it was easier to bomb all of them at the same time. By the way, it's not that different from what Israel did to Hezbollah. You might remember, after the beeper attacks against Hezbollah, all the Radwan top commanders had to get together in person because they couldn't communicate electronically. Israel nailed them all at once. So this is definitely an Israeli strategy. Basically, you break down all of the electronic communications, you freak people out at all of the places they would normally want to go, and then they try to get to like a really secret, safe place. But if Israel knows where that is, then that actually is advantageous to Israel. So you're talking about 9 out of 13 of the top military officials, a dozen top nuclear officials, right? That's separate. Those are all separate. And you're talking about hitting almost every single nuclear facility, dozens, not one or two or three. The media were, we have a short attention span, so we talk about, Natanz and Fordow, and maybe if people have a little more attention, Isfahan, but there's dozens of nuclear facilities. And
Mm,
so all of these are being hit basically at the same time on the same day. Ballistic missile sites are being hit so that by the time Iran is ready to shoot back, they already don't have as many launchers. And
right.
if you have 2,000 ballistic missiles, but you're down from 400 launchers to 300 launchers and eventually down to 200 launchers, then you can't shoot more than 200 missiles. And you really can, most people can't shoot everything at once that they have. And so we
Mm,
saw, by the end of the operation, Iran was only able to shoot, 10 or so missiles a day. And that already was, Israel was generally able to shoot all or almost all of those down. So all of this basically happens in the first day. I don't want to say that the other days between the first day and the day that Trump attacks Fordo weren't significant, but I'd say 80%, maybe more, of the damage that Israel does to the nuclear program, ballistic missile program, nuclear scientists, and top Iranian officials is all in one day before Iran even gets to shoot back.
mm. Yeah, I was going to say, because some of our audience are in Israel and some are not, that those of us in Israel will note, it was very obvious to us that by the end of the war, that Iran had to make this choice, right, of whether to, if they could either fire lots of missiles to try and maximize the amount of damage, but they were running out of missiles by that point. So they opted instead to fire fewer missiles, thereby causing less damage, but allowing them to continue with the I guess the disturbance to the country by having keep on the keep having sirens across the country, that sort of thing. But it was obvious to us that it was tens rather than hundreds.
Right. No, it
That's
started. Look, their original goal, if we hadn't hit them so hard, would have been to shoot like 500 missiles.
right.
So even on the first day, they were only able to shoot around 200.
Mm,
It dropped to 100, dropped to 75, dropped to 50, dropped to 30, and eventually was down to 10.
mm. Amazing. Um, so uh, I can already see some. There's a couple of questions that are related to what I'm going to ask now, which is, as I mentioned, after the war effectively ended with after following the American bombing of Fordo, you wrote in the Jerusalem Post a piece which I think was, as I said, a very very useful clarifying article on this whole question of, well, I'll read the headline, which was why Iran is a couple of years from a bomb despite critiques, right? So the critiques, we all know that no, it's only a few months, it didn't really do much damage, etc., etc. What was your article about, and why do you feel, and I guess, and also do you still feel reasonably confident in the claims you made in that piece?
So I and a small group of military Hebrew-speaking journalists heard from the top people in Israel about exactly what had been done and what had not been done. So I'm 100% confident. Also, they only told us what they knew. They told us also what they didn't know. So, I have these are not political officials. These are top, defense people,
Right.
and they're being very clear about what they know and what they don't know. They're not trying to exaggerate. Anybody who says the whole program was obliterated, this is like a political statement. You don't, and it's unnecessary. We don't need to obliterate everything to, eliminate the threat or remove the threat, so to speak. So let's put like the adjectives on the side. The question is,
Mm,
can Iran get back to being a nuclear threat in months, or will it take it years? And I'm convinced that it will take it years. The reason is that you need to look at the full scope of the program, the full scope of the damage that's been done. If you look at one particular site, is it possible that X number of centrifuges, right? The centrifuges, those are the machines that spin around really fast to enrich uranium in order to make a nuclear weapon. So, did some of the 20,000 centrifuges survive? I'm sure some of them did. IDF would not say that all of them were obliterated. But if you have five under rubble, in this part of the country and 10 under rubble, very far away somewhere else, and another 10 very far under rubble somewhere else, then you're digging, those are, separate digging projects all over the place. And you can't just sort of like attach them all. You have to decide, okay, we're going to move these centrifuges from point A to point B and this from point C to point D. You're doing that all at the same time. Now, if that was the only thing you had to do, so maybe they'd be okay. But if you do all of that and you don't rebuild the weapons group functions, then uranium is utterly useless. Okay, that you can weaponize uranium to 90%. If you can't detonate it, you can't detonate uranium with a match. You have to use a special kind of neutron process and shockwave generators in order to create a special kind of explosion, in order to create a nuclear explosion. And then after all of that, you have to, create uranium metal and hemispheres in order to put it on a specific kind of warhead, in order to be able to put that warhead on a ballistic missile to actually do what it's supposed to do. And all of that is different than how a normal warhead works. All of the stuff was blown up completely. So they have to rebuild, the facility in Isfahan that was able to make uranium into uranium metal for a warhead and hemispheres, and they have to rebuild, other facilities where they were working on, the neutron process. And now, if you had all of your scientists with all of their information at their fingertips, maybe they could move a little bit faster. But most of the big nuclear scientists are dead, and most of their data was blown up. Now you can assemble together some nuclear scientists, the second string, the third string, because Israel decided very carefully who it was going to kill. It killed like the top 13, basically. Or maybe it was the top 13 on the first day, and then they killed some more. So if you have your second and third string scientists working on, 15 different rebuilding projects all at the same time, missing large portions of their data, they're not going to be able to do that in a few months, especially if have to do that all at the same time. So really, their best case scenario is probably a couple of years. It is very possible that they just decide at this point, even if they don't say so out loud, that it's not worth it, that the amount of the cost and the energy they have to put into it, they may just back off from it. Now, that could be wishful thinking. And so, if they do still try to go after the nuclear program, Israel's keeping an eye on it. And right now, Iran has no air defense. And so, Israel, if it has to go in again, will be ready to go in again.
Right. Yeah, I guess that's also that's quite a deterrence, I guess, in terms of like, Iran starting, putting time and energy and resources into starting again, knowing that Israel could just destroy it all in a matter of hours. I'm sure we'll go back to some of this when we go to audience questions, but I want to move to the sort of the kind of second, I guess, the sort of second topic that your book discusses, because it talks not just about stopping Iran going nuclear, but also creating a new Middle East.
Right.
And however utopian that sounds, and I think we're not talking so much about what Shimon Peres was talking about 30 years ago, but more what perhaps the Abraham Accords could be the beginning of. What was the role of the Mossad in the Abraham Accords? Let's start with that, and we can say more about today.
So the first thing people need to understand is that the Mossad was building the Abraham Accords for a very long time, going back at least to the era of Meir Dagan, 2002 to 2011. By the way, Meir Dagan also was very responsible for some of the initial waves of assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists.
This is the legendary former head of the Mossad.
Right,
Right.
2002 to 2011. My book focuses more on Yossi Cohen, 2016 to 2021, because he blows up some really big nuclear facilities. He's the one who gets the secret nuclear archives, and he's the one where the Abraham Accords actually happen. So by the time he gets into office, there already are relationships between the Mossad and, most important, the Saudis, also the UAE. Also, Bahrain and Morocco and Sudan. There's already relationships, but he has to be the one to nail it down. In the end, the final negotiation in Washington is done by Ron Dermer. But basically, building all of that foundation is Yossi Cohen, and he's meeting with MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who's basically running the show because his father is pretty over the hill already for a long time. And so I can tell you that right before, and it's like something that people are sort of getting used to now, in 2025, that Israel and the Saudis share intelligence, and the Saudis already over the last year have helped Israel with defense against Iranian missiles 3 times. So people are getting used to that. But the first time that Israel and the Saudis publicly talked about sharing intelligence was 2017 during Yossi Cohen's era. Gadi Eisenkot, who's the IDF chief, basically makes a announcement that Israel and the Saudis are sharing intelligence. And this happens shortly after Yossi Cohen met with MBS and sort of set the stage for all of that happening. You have another instance, March 21st, 2020. People may remember there was this thing at the time called COVID, or the coronavirus. This is only 8 days after the pandemic starts on March 13th. And basically, Yossi Cohen is getting 10 million masks from the UAE. And this is a time period where I think Israel has less than 1 million masks. Nobody has masks all over the planet. Everybody, there's no vaccine. Nobody knows how to fight this thing. And the Mossad is able to get 10 million masks clandestinely from the UAE, even though we don't have diplomatic relations. And so basically, I actually had this story a little bit earlier. They keep it down for like a week before it was partially leaked out. And when I wrote it, I had to write from a Middle Eastern country. I couldn't say who. Um, and only 3 months later, in June, Netanyahu finally announces that it was the UAE. And that speech was carefully written by Yossi Cohen in working with MBZ. We have a lot of MBs. MBZ is Mohammed bin Zayed, the head of the UAE, to make sure that the rollout would be successful and sensitive to their needs in the UAE. By the way, there have been other rollouts that were less successful. Eli Cohen, when he was foreign minister, made a declaration about Libya normalization, and the Libya foreign minister was basically ousted and had to like run out of her country. So you have to be really careful about how you do these things. And Yossi Cohen was an artist in getting it just the right pitch, to provide the normalization to sort of go forward.
Um, what what can you tell us about, because it sounds a little unusual for the basically the spy agency, right? The foreign secret service, effectively, to be operating as a kind of alternative foreign ministry. What's the where does that come from? Why was it Meir Dagan and Yossi Cohen doing this and not senior diplomats at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
So first of all countries do some clandestine work with their, secret intelligence agencies with countries that they don't have diplomatic relations with, or with countries where there's some sort of very sensitive, security issue. But it is much larger with Israel. Why? Because so many countries don't have diplomatic relations with us. And so basically, the Mossad has always had, or in many recent decades, has an outsized role in building or trying to build future relations with Arab countries, sometimes with China, sometimes with Russia, countries where they're very, very tricky business, and where if it, blows up, so to speak, Israel doesn't want to have to take responsibility. So if you do it secretly, you have plausible deniability. And if the foreign ministry is involved, the whole thing has to be public, and there's a way to, people usually know that what they're doing. So if you have the Mossad involved, you could have an agent fly on an unchartered flight, land on a fake runway, be spirited off in like, a truck that doesn't show who's inside so that nobody knows he was ever there. And you can't do that as well with a foreign ministry official who's sort of supposed to be a public figure.
Okay, that's a good answer. So if we fast forward to where we are now, we're there's a lot of talk now, especially I guess since Trump came into office, but certainly even more so in the last few weeks and months, of getting back on the train of expansion of the Abraham Accords, the Saudis being interested in being the next country, which would be a real game changer because of the importance of the Saudi Arabia in the Muslim world. And of course, we were there before October 7th, and October 7th really put a stop to that, at least temporarily, which, as we now know, was actually part of Hamas's intention, right? One of the things they wanted to do with their attack was to stop the process of Saudi normalization. So where do you see that now? Where do you see it going?
Right. So as you said, I think it's September 23rd of 2023, somewhere in there, literally 2 weeks before October 7th, MBS, the Crown Prince, says that normalization is basically happening tomorrow. Like if Hamas doesn't do that attack, there's probably normalization within a month or two. That's how close Israel and the Saudis were to normalization. And the reason this is happening is all of those other four countries that we talked about that did normalize in 2020, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, none of that happens if it doesn't have the Saudi blessing. That's why I started with Yossi Cohen and MBS, because the Saudis didn't want to go first, but they wanted this to happen in order that they would be able to sign on to. What's the problem? The UAE, I would say, sort of sold out, so to speak, for cheap, in terms of they wanted to help the Palestinian cause. So what was their help of the Palestinian cause? Netanyahu committed in 2020 that he temporarily, for the foreseeable future, wouldn't annex the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria. But that's sort of, he didn't say I would never do it, and he didn't give any other actual concessions, new concessions to the Palestinians. The Saudis want more than that. They're, as far as they're concerned, they're the capital of the Arab world, and for them to join, they need something really big sort of being done for the Palestinians. This all goes downhill when the war starts because even if the Saudis they really do want to normalize with Israel. They want our help defense, against Iran. They want our help fighting terror. They want our cyber weapons. Um, and so basically, they want this, but they still need to deal with public opinion, and public opinion all over the Arab world turns against us after October 7th because a lot of Palestinians get killed. We can say that a large portion of them, 20,000 or maybe, even, several thousand, more than 20,000 are Hamas. But the fact is, even if the numbers are exaggerated, a large number of Palestinian civilians were killed. That happens in every war. And it's a tragedy. Israel doesn't try to do it, but it's something that happens in every war. And so the Saudi public and a lot of the Arab world is now against Israel. And so MBS suddenly can't just do it. But what happens? There are points in the war where maybe it could have ended in January 2024, certainly in May 2024, before Israel goes into Rafah. And the Saudis are basically begging, and they're saying, if you end the war now and declare that you will allow a path towards a Palestinian state will normalize with you right now. So suddenly, it goes from the Saudis want to normalize to they don't want to normalize to they really, really do want to normalize again. And now we're back at a point where they're less interested in jumping to normalize because, basically, again, the war has gone on for 20 months. But what if the war ends and Israel does find some way to accommodate the Palestinians with something new enough that the Saudis can say, we got something for the Palestinians, even if it's short from whatever the Palestinians thought they would get in the Oslo Accords 30 years ago, in light of where things are now,
Yeah.
they might take less, the Saudis might take less. And so there still is a high chance of normalization, not next week, not next month, with the Saudis, but some other countries, yes. And if the war ends and Israel makes some movement towards the Palestinians, it could lead to normalization with the Saudis.
Right. I guess the the question is, the two questions are, one, how 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 far down the road does Israel need to go to to supporting a Palestinian state or whatever, and is whatever the Saudis want doable with the current Israeli coalition? Because obviously, this particular coalition is the least. If you think of all the governments that Netanyahu has been prime minister of, he's currently the prime minister of the one which it would be the most difficult to get any kind of concession from on the Palestinian issue, right?
Right. So, yeah, I think it could be difficult for Netanyahu to make the concessions. And again, I think the concessions are much less. I
Right.
think, I don't think he would need to withdraw from 90% of the West Bank like they
Sure,
were
sure.
talking about, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I don't think he would need to give up, half of Jerusalem or part of, East Jerusalem
Right.
at this point. But some sort of commitment towards a
There'd
Palestinian
be need to be
state.
some kind of declarative statement, which may or may not be too much for Ben Gvir and Smotrich, right?
Right. So yeah, so there's a good chance that that might be too much for them. I think what you would see in that scenario is you'd see help from Benny Gantz and Yair
Yeah.
Lapid. I mean, they've said that if Netanyahu ends the war and if Netanyahu is able to get to Saudi normalization, they'll support it. Now, Netanyahu may not want to do that yet. He may want to sort of push this coalition longer. He may think that he can get Saudi normalization on even better terms in 6 months or a year or whatever it is, or after winning another election, if he's able to win another election.
Mm.
Or he may decide he's not sure he can win this election just with the, sort of success he had against Iran and Hezbollah, that if he's going to sort of steal some center people over from some of the center parties, then he may need some kind of a normalization win. So then you could see him rolling the dice and working with Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid. I don't think Netanyahu has decided yet, but there's no question in my mind from the top officials, very high officials that I've spoken to, the Saudis still do want normalization, and they're just waiting for Israel to basically come up with a formula. Again, not as good as what the Saudis thought they would get, 5 years ago or certainly 10 years ago, but something that's quote unquote good enough that they can hold their heads a little bit higher, let's say, than the UAE.
Okay, interesting times indeed. Okay, There's a lot of interesting questions already that have been entered into the chat. We'll go to some of those. Let me just say that someone did ask earlier about sending the recording to people. I will do that. I'm writing in the chat my email address. For those of you who are not on my mailing list, that is, who get my emails about the events that we have in English, both on Zoom and in person. If you're not on that mailing list and would like to be, then send me an email. And I will put you on the mailing list. That way, you'll also automatically get the recordings of all our events. Okay. So there are a few questions that I'll put to you that are kind of related, which are connected to this issue of the aftermath of the operation in Iran. So there are a couple of references to the so-called the apparent 400 kilograms of uranium, which may or may not be somewhere. So Jacqueline says, do you think Mossad knows where it is? Is it possible that Iran has a secret nuclear facility somewhere in this huge country? Joseph asks, what can Iran do to weaponize its 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium in the next few weeks and months? And maybe I'll just throw in Hannah, who asks, what prevents Iran from purchasing a nuclear bomb from another country?
Oh wait, I got the uranium, the enriched uranium. I
So
missed.
yes,
What
what
was
can
this?
Iran do to weaponize it? Might it be hidden somewhere? Iran's such a big country, and does the Mossad know where it might be? And
Got it.
finally, what prevents Iran from purchasing a nuclear bomb from another country?
Okay. So Israel did not destroy all of the enriched uranium. Israel does know where segments of that uranium is. Some of that uranium is under rubble. Some of that uranium was moved, but Israel is following where it was moved. And in terms of, there were just, again, the same way that there were people who were, going crazy over Trump saying that he obliterated everything, so that was unnecessary. The people who are going, crazy over that not all of the uranium was blown up is also unnecessary because if it's under rubble and if you don't have centrifuges that are working in the same place that can enrich it, and if you don't, as I talked about, have any of the weapons elements in order to turn it into a weapon once it's enriched, then I'm not going to say it's irrelevant. But again, this is why it could take years to use it. And you have to remember that all of these facilities, again, were hit by, the Mossad and the IDF. So, like, if they were able to hit it before, you really think they can't hit it again? People were excited about these trucks that came to Fordo, the commercial satellites spotted. You think the IDF and the Mossad had no idea that a whole line of trucks came to Fordo and commercial satellites spotted it? And you see what the penetration that the Mossad and the IDF have. I think people are missing the point. I understand why people are worried, but I think the media, people who jumped on this and said, "See, Israel blew it," they're missing the point. So, can it be weaponized? It can be weaponized, but like I said, it probably can't be weaponized where it is. If it's under rubble, you have to get it out of the rubble, and then you have to find a place where there are centrifuges that don't have rubble on them, and maybe there isn't enough, so maybe you have to move all of them to a different facility. And this isn't like a computer. You can't just put centrifuges on your car and drive them. So all of these things take time. So that's again why, could they weaponize it? Yes. But could they weaponize it any time in the near future? No. And even if they weaponize it, all of the weapons groups of stuff, again, for detonation, for delivery of a nuclear weapon, were taken out. So it still would be weaponized uranium that couldn't be used for anything, again, at least for the foreseeable future. Are there things that are hidden that Israel doesn't know about? There could be, but if you think about, again, that Israel hit dozens of nuclear sites, 9 out of the 13 top Iranian commanders, a bunch of them at their secret layer that they went to when their original layers were hit. It seems like Israel's pretty good at knowing what Iran's secrets are, even though it's a big country. So I'm not going to say that Iran doesn't have any cards up its sleeve, but the idea that it has, the best nuclear facility hasn't been found, that's not what's going on here, right? The best nuclear facilities were Fordow, Natanz, Isfahan. By the way, all of those facilities started off as secrets. Israel, the CIA, and Iranian dissident groups found them. All of those were secret sites
Right.
until they were discovered.
Right.
Um, the most disturbing option is, can they purchase a nuclear weapon from somebody else? Let's say North Korea, because North Korea is I don't see Russia and China doing this. Russia and China think the Iranians are crazy. All right, Russia and China aren't very into fanatical religious Muslims. Um, it happens to be that they have an interest in selling them conventional weapons, but the Russians and the Chinese do not want Iran to get a nuclear weapon either. So North Korea is the big concern. The majority opinion that I've gotten, there is a debate about this. Some people are worried about the North Koreans giving a nuclear weapon to Iran, but the majority opinion that I have from people, and this is not, people who sing Kumbaya, this is hawkish people who just analyze the data, say that it's just not in North Korean interest. If people find out that North Korea gave Iran a nuclear weapon, they're done. They're done for. And right now they're surviving. So why would they care enough about the Iranians to risk their survival as a regime? What exactly does it do for them to give Iran a nuclear weapon? What do they care about Israel and the Middle East? They don't care. So to risk the survival of their regime, to intervene in a region that they don't care about, it's one thing. The fact that the North Koreans and the Iranians have shared all kinds of nuclear ideas and technology at sort of lower and mid levels, there's a lot of history to that. But to give over a whole nuclear weapon, at least the majority view is they wouldn't do it.
Okay. Of course, people may recall that it was the North Koreans who supplied the Syrians with the nuclear facilities, and that Israel knocked out in 2007. Um,
Correct.
there's a interesting question here from Rob Bloom, who says, after the war ended, there's been a great witch hunt in Iran for collaborators with Israel. Do you think in war planning the Israeli leaders have done enough to protect them afterwards, or are we watching a great indigenous intel asset melt away?
So what I have to say to this is, if you follow reports over the years, there are a lot of these reports. You could probably find dozens of reports of Iran and Turkey busting alleged Mossad agents over the last 5 years. Some of them are fake, right? Some of them are political opposition, and you want to sort of defame them, so you call them a Mossad agent. Some of them are real, right? Mossad agents get caught. The CIA, I think it's 2010 to 2013, they had like this whole special communications service that was broken through, and like dozens of their agents all over the place were caught. So it happens. Even the best agencies lose people. Again, what I would say is, if you look at the number of announcements that Iran made, let's say even 20% or 30% of them are true. So let's say that they've arrested over the years, dozens of Mossad agents. We still got hundreds of agents in on June 13th. So I don't want to be, sort of not take seriously the loss of life of agents that worked for the Mossad. I think most of the ones who get caught usually are locals. Um, So, I want to take their lives seriously also. But in terms of sort of, is Israel able to continue to do what it needs to do to penetrate? I come back to the statistic I said at the beginning. There's 90 million Iranians, and maybe a majority of them don't see the Iranian regime as a legitimate regime that, that governs them. They see it as a foreign occupier of sorts. So there's literally tens of millions of people that could be recruited from. Obviously, you don't want to lose agents, but Israel, I think, is in a very strong position. Even I'm sure they're losing agents now. With that large an operation, you're going to lose people. But yes, I think Israel has the capability and the depth in Iran to be able to continue to do what it needs to do.
It's a really great point when we think about. I think we people too readily sort of equate Iran with the rest of the Middle East, forgetting that it's not an Arab state, that it has a completely different history, and that unlike the Arab countries which Israel has had cause to be in some kind of conflict with over the years, Iran is a country where there is as you say, a real reservoir of people who are very against the regime and might be inclined to help to help Israel against it.
Yeah, help Israel, and they have no land claims with us. They're
Right.
1,500
Yeah.
kilometers away from us.
Right. There's not once you remove the Islamic Republic, there's no indigenous Iranian complaint against Israel.
Israel and Iran were very good friends right
Right.
up until 1979.
Right. A couple of questions here that are related. Eric asks, given that Iran now knows the extent of Israeli intelligence penetration, what are the chances that they'd be able to disrupt Israel's operations in the future? And connected to that, Jonathan says, is there a way that some other country, he says China or North Korea or Russia, could rebuild Iran's air defenses in a way that would be effective?
Okay. I'm going to answer the second question first. Um, I'm prohibited by the censor from giving full information to the answer, but let's just say I've heard some good news about the radar issue. I can't say more than that, but I've heard some good news about it. In terms of the first question, will Iran be able now to finally defend itself after everything that Israel did to it, and it studies all of our sources and methods? Will they be able to stop us? If you look at my book, again, there have been other times, not to this extent, but other times where Israel and the Mossad ran wild in Iran. If you go to July 2020, um, I can't actually remember now exactly what the rule is, so I'm going to still say, according to foreign sources, the Mossad blew up the Natanz nuclear facility in July 2020. They blew it up again in April 2021. And in July 2020, when they blew up the facility, there were something like a dozen other Iranian military facilities that all happened to blow up within about a month.
Right.
And if you go into, this is all in Yossi Cohen's era, but if you go into David Barnea's era, he's the current head of the Mossad, you look at late April 2022 to mid-June 2022, a dozen top Iranian nuclear scientists and drone scientists and terror chiefs are all killed and assassinated. One of them is captured, interrogated inside Iran, videotaped, being interrogated inside Iran, and then they let him go. So this is the level of penetration, and Iran was not able to come back from that. And again, I come back to, people always say that Iran has this advantage over Israel because it's a country that I think it's like 3 times the size of France, and it's 90 million people. And how can little Israel compete against that? Except that means, in terms of penetration, it's 3 times the size of France to penetrate. And in terms of people, again, there's tens of millions of people to recruit from. So I'm sure Iran has learned a lot. I'm sure there will be certain things they'll be able to stop up, but it's just too big a target with too many people and too many holes to basically completely plug when so many of these people don't see the regime as legitimate.
Right. And I also think it's been revealed as a fantastically inefficient regime. I mean, I think it's really, I mean, it's not providing for its people. It turns out it hasn't done a good job of defending itself either. There's a question from Daniel here, which I suspect you will not, that you will know, or in fact, no, I don't think anyone would be able to answer this definitively, but your informed opinion would be welcome. He says if Iran was so exact and proficient, and I would add Lebanon as well, why is Gaza, in his words, the exact opposite?
Okay, so my the best analogy, because I've been asked about this a lot, that I can give is there's basically, in sports, there's, different kinds of sporting events where you might have like a best of seven series. You need to win four games out of seven. And there's sports where you have one game and that's it, one chance. And so if Israel played Hamas in a best of seven series, they'd win six out of seven all the time and sometimes seven out of seven. It happened to be Hamas had one good day. They had one surprising day. And so, they sort of ran the table militarily, they ran the table on Israel. Um, and one of the reasons was that Israel didn't take them seriously. Again, if you have a sports team that's so good and full of themselves, and you have a team that's much less talented, but they show up one day really, really motivated, you've seen, tremendous, tremendous upsets in sports if it's only one game. But when you see, the weak team play the strong team in a series, then the strong team takes the weak team seriously, and they basically pummel them after that, which is what happened, right? I mean, Hamas's 24 battalions were all taken apart by May 2024. Most of them were taken apart by January, February 2024. So once Israel got itself together, Hamas had no chance. Iran and Hezbollah were the big, scary adversaries, and Israel was taking them very seriously all the time. So Israel was, investing. I want to say these are fake percentages, but let's say it was investing 60% of its energies, clandestine intelligence, air force in Iran, 30% in Hezbollah, and 10% in Hamas. So when it came to Iran, it was ready with gazillions of targets, huge amounts of penetration. It knew everything about Iran, knew everything about Hezbollah, and Hamas. They almost had no spies inside Gaza because they didn't think they were a serious threat, and it never occurred to them that Hamas would be stupid enough to launch an invasion in Israel, knowing what Israel would do and now has done to Hamas in Gaza. So Israel made a mistake thinking that Hamas was a rational actor, and it
Mm.
didn't take them seriously.
But right, but what about? I think also, I think Daniel also means that since that day, the war in Gaza has been much well. It's still going on. We weren't
Ah,
we haven't been
okay.
able we haven't been able to decisively win
No,
as we
that
did in Iran and in Lebanon.
No, so that's because of the hostages. All right. Hezbollah has no hostages. Iran has no hostages. Israel could drop its largest bombs on Hezbollah from day one, the largest bombs on Iran from day one. And from day one, Israel, it's a little bit easier now because there's quote unquote only 50 hostages. But at the beginning, there were 250 hostages. They were all over the place. And it was very, very difficult for Israel to, figure out how to advance without killing hostages. I've been in Gaza 5 times, and every time you can see they get rid of more and more housing and structures so that there's fewer places where Hamas can, hide and use booby traps. And the hostages now are in, let's say, 10 or 20% of Gazan territory. So Israel has been able to take over 75% of Gazan territory, could probably take over a little bit more without endangering the hostages. But that's still a problem. Even now, when Hamas is militarily beaten over and over and over again, because Israel doesn't want to have the hostages get killed, Israel has to pull its punches.
Hmm. There were a couple of questions relating to this is a little off topic, I guess, but I'm interested in your thoughts on it. There's been this story which some people might have seen about a sheikh in Hebron who has been saying that he wants to have a separate peace with Israel. He wants to separate Hebron from the Palestinian Authority and have some emirate of Hebron, which makes its own separate peace with Israel and joins the Abraham Accords. So there's Ira asks whether you think that Netanyahu will talk to Trump about the possibility of an emirate of Hebron, and Rob asks whether you think that the Saudis might support the Sheikh's plan as an alternative to dealing with the PA.
So I actually interviewed the Sheikh of Hebron,
Mm.
um, and what I would say is, first of all, he's an impressive character. There certainly is a constituency of Palestinians in Hebron that want this. There certainly is a constituency of Israelis, mostly on the right-wing side of the political spectrum, who want this. It's got a very uphill battle to fight. The Shin Bet is very against it. The IDF is very against it. Basically, neither of them like the Palestinian Authority. Both of them think the Palestinian Authority does an inadequate job fighting terrorism, but both of them think that the Palestinian Authority does a better job fighting terrorism than these sheikhs will be able to do, because it is a, trained national, so to speak, organization that has, central leadership. And what they're doing in Hebron, it's not, if they did in Hebron, it's not clear that they would be able to do it in the six other major Palestinian pockets. Not, culturally, not all the pockets are the same. For example, Ramallah is much, much more secular. Hebron is much more, again, tribal. So I think it's a very interesting idea. Um, and, if both sides end up coming to think that this is the best way to coexist, maybe it'll be pursued more. But right now, you have, again, the Shin Bet and the IDF and the Palestinian Authority are all against it. And at least for now, the moderate Sunni Arab states are against it. So the only way it would happen would be if Netanyahu pushed very hard for it and Trump gave him very, very strong backing for it. Right now, Netanyahu hasn't decided that he even wants to identify with it. He knows that it's happening, but I think, he's holding his cards close to him in terms of what's going to happen with the Saudis and the future of the Gaza war. And so he's only going to decide on that piece as part of the, the bigger picture. What does he think is the sort of the best move in the bigger picture?
Okay, that's very useful. I'm going to finish on this. So Uri Yerushalmi asks, he asks how you know about the things you're reporting on. Maybe if I could just expand on that a little with your permission, Uri, just if you could just tell us a little briefly. Of course, we don't have that much time anyway, but obviously you won't be able to tell us everything. But the work that you do obviously involves a lot of stuff that you can't talk about. The minute you mentioned having sensitive information. So can you just tell us a little bit about what your job entails in terms of getting this information, how you get it as much as you can tell us, and what the restrictions are on what you can say and not say, and who enforces those?
Right. So I'd say the most exciting piece is the Mossad piece, because that's almost completely individual, meaning there are very rare instances where, there'll be some sort of Mossad group briefing. The 2018 operation, was one of them. But it's very, very rare that the Mossad will do any kind of official publicity. The Shin Bet and the IDF have, spokespeople, official spokespeople. The Mossad doesn't even have an official spokesperson. So you really have to get to people individually on your own. And then you have to convince them that you're trustworthy. I try, some of our newer journalists at the Jerusalem Post, I try to teach them about playing the long game. There's a tendency in journalism today more than ever to, just think about how do I get from the source the best clickbait, title that I can put online that'll get the most clicks today, and that's all that matters. So if you do that, you're not going to get serious people to trust you. You have to sometimes have to be willing to meet with people without publishing a word that they say, and then they see, okay, this person can keep their mouth shut. This person has some judgment. You ask, hard, interesting questions to them. You do research on them that shows them that you care about, the subject matter and that you take them seriously and that you take yourself seriously. And then after that, you develop relationships over time. There are things that sources told me after 2 years that they wouldn't have told me in the first 6 months, even if they started to like me. So that, it's a ongoing process. The IDF stuff, there is this small group of Hebrew media, which I'm in, but it's almost all Hebrew media. And so that there are some certain amount of group briefings from top IDF officials, but the Mossad stuff is almost completely individual, and it takes a lot of patience, and playing the long game. I do have a note on sources in Target Tehran in the book, talks a little bit about myself and Yossi Cohen.
Okay, well, that's very interesting and revealing for many of us, I'm sure. And thank you very much for really giving us a huge amount of information that we really didn't have before and haven't been able to glean from the various different, often competing stories that we see in various media outlets. Really appreciate your time, Yonah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We have more events coming. Check our website, check our Facebook page. Email me, as I said, if you're not on my mailing list and you want to be, paulg@begincentre.org.il, and I will add you to the list. I want to thank everyone and have a good the rest of the day or evening, depending where you are in the world. Bye-bye.
Thank you.